My name is Max Hurst.
All right, Max, where are you from?
I was born in Laurel, Mississippi.
Okay. And tell us about how you entered the Marine Corps.
In 1966, early 66, I received my draft notice. I was 1A. I was not interested in college. So I'd been working. Received my draft notice. Did not want to, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why then, but I did not want to go into the Army. My next door neighbor was the Air Force recruiter. I talked to him. I took their test. He said I could do anything I wanted to do in the Air Force, but I couldn't fly. And I had an interest in flying. And he suggested that I visit the Marine Corps recruiter, which I did, because they had a warrant officer program. But anyway, I signed up for 3 years with the Marines because he told me I would get a better military occupational specialty with a 3-year rather than a 2-year enlistment.
What year was this?
1966.
1966.
So 2 other gentlemen were from my high school were also going in, so he put all 3 of us in on the buddy program. We went to Louisville, Kentucky to take our physical, and I failed the physical with high blood pressure, which didn't do anything but make me mad. So I went back home to Bowling Green, Kentucky at the time, and visited the doctor, the family doctor, for 2 weeks, took medications, went back for the test and failed it again. The corpsman even had me lay down and relax and all that, and I still couldn't pass the test, which again made me mad. And I told him I wanted to see whoever was in charge, which he took me in front of a Navy doctor. And I told him I was as healthy as anybody else he was sending out of there, but in different words. And he just smiled at me and said, "I think you are," and sent me to Parris Island.
And tell us about Parris Island.
I'm sure you have plenty of stories on Parris Island. There's just no way to be prepared for what's going to happen to you. You know, I don't know how it is today, but in '66, they couldn't physically abuse you, but they could sure scare you. And when you got off the bus and put your feet on the yellow footprints, your life changed. I think it did a great deal for me. I'm proud of my time in the Marines and what they did for me.
Well, good. Now, once you finished at Parris Island, where did you go to?
I think the next step was infantry training, which everybody's exposed to. All Marines are first a rifleman, of course. We did ITR. After that, I think we got a break, and then I went to motor transport school. I was a 35-16, which was a mechanic.
Okay. And then how soon did you find yourself going to Vietnam?
After motor transport school, I wound up in Camp Lejeune with the 2nd Medical Battalion. And of course I went in March of '66. And by, I think it was either late November or early December, I had orders to Vietnam. And put me in California at Pendleton for jungle warfare school. I was out there in December and January of '67.
Okay.
And then I have no idea what the name of the ship was, but I wound up going to Vietnam on a ship, a troop transport, I guess they would call it, which you just couldn't be any more miserable in your life than be on one of those. The funny part of that was when we reached Vietnam, we were just off the shore and outside of Da Nang. We actually had to climb the nets down the boats like you see in the pictures of the Second World War, with your gear and everything down into Mike boats and then taken to the beach. And we didn't know any different than that we were going to have be under attack when we landed. So it was pretty interesting. And then you just walked over the sand dunes there, and they had trucks waiting to take you into town. And I had been assigned to 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion, which was out southwest of Da Nang on Hill 34. So that's where I started my Vietnam service.
Okay. And did you have any close friends that were in your unit? Did you make any close friends?
Made some friends. I'm not sure I would call them close. Well, while there, we later moved up outside of Phu Bai to a camp called Gia, and I had a real good friend there that the camp was under attack one day, and we were running together to get to our gear, and he went down and I was on reactionary squad and had to go out. But he got back up and he said his shoulder hurt, and I looked and there was no blood, there was no evidence of a hole or anything else, but he had actually been shot in the shoulder. And I went out on the reactionary squad, and when I came back found out he'd been medevaced. The interesting part of that is I remembered him being from Fort Walton Beach in Florida. And anytime we would go to Destin, I would go through the white pages and things like that trying to find him. I had the wrong last name. I was looking for Williams, and his name was John Willis. Well, strangely enough, this past fall, his wife found my name on Facebook and said, "Were you in Vietnam?" and so on and so forth. And I replied, she said, "My husband may know you." And I replied if he was with 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion, then yes. And they had planned their 50th wedding anniversary at Pigeon Forge. So my wife and I were able to go up and visit with them and spend a day with them up there, which was, it was great to reunite that way.
Wow, that is neat. So being with the 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion, what was that unit? What was the purpose of that unit? What did y'all do?
Well, 3rd Anti-Tank, the anti-tank weapon was called an Ontos, and it was a tracked vehicle with a large Chrysler gasoline engine in it. It would run about 40 miles an hour, and it had 6 106 recoilless rifles mounted on it. And it was to support the grunts or the infantry. And was a very effective weapon, but it was quite dangerous in that the back blast off a 106 recoilless rifle can kill you if you're behind it. And I didn't realize this until John and I got together at Christmas, just after Christmas time. I came out of Nam during Tet of '68, and he still had some months to do. And I knew they were closing out 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion. And so they took the Ontos out of service. That was, I don't know this for 100%, but I think Vietnam is the last that the Ontos was ever used because of the problems they had with it. So they actually moved him and the Ontos unit. They closed out 3rd Anti-Tanks, but they moved the Ontos that they had left over to 3rd Tanks, which was right next door to us. And I guess that served out until the end of the war, or until they quit using them.
Okay. How long were you in Vietnam?
13 months.
13 months. Did you have any correspondence from family? I mean, letters or?
Yes, of course, from my parents. Occasionally from my brother. And a couple of cousins.
Okay.
Wrote to me.
But that made you feel good anytime you got a...
It was nice to receive news from home. Mail call was quite a significant time for us.
I bet. Any other stories or situations from Vietnam that you want to share?
Something I've always found interesting was we had a warrant officer who, for a while, who was in charge of our motor pool, and of course I was in the motor pool. And I don't remember his name, but he called me in one day and told me the Marine Corps wanted to make an officer and a gentleman out of me. They wanted to send me to Quantico. And I just looked at him. It was quite interesting. I was a corporal at the time, had good cutting scores and good marks, had graduated top of the platoon in boot camp. And I asked him for his honest opinion. And he said, "Well, Hurst, what they're going to do is they'll take you back to Quantico, you'll go to OCS, you'll graduate as a Mustang, You'll have full 6 years to do once you graduate, and you'll probably wind back here as a second lieutenant grunt officer, and that's the highest mortality rate we have. So I just smiled and thanked him and went on about my business.
Wow.
I turned it down.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about returning to the States from Vietnam.
It's interesting that I really have extremely limited memory. I remember in Da Nang because it was during Tet. I remember that night being under a shelter someplace at the airfield. Vaguely. The only thing I remember about the trip home was it was a commercial airliner, and when it came off that runway, I did not know commercial jets could go straight up. But because of the ground fire and everything that was going on around it, he just stood it straight up. And that's the only memory that I have of the trip home. Vaguely in arriving in California, going through the processing and getting the papers and the travel orders home, which I would have been flying back to Nashville, Tennessee then. I have limited memory.
Okay.
I don't remember having any problems with protesters or anybody saying anything bad to me about my service, as things were happening then. I don't remember any of that.
Okay. Once you returned to the States, did you stay in the Marine Corps, or did you?
I still had time to do, so I was, oddly enough, assigned back to Camp Lejeune, back to the 2nd Medical Battalion where I had left from. I had not been in the States, but just a very short period of time after my leave that they were going to put me on a Mediterranean cruise. And I went to the gunnery sergeant at the motor pool and said, look, I've just gotten back from Nam. I really don't want to leave again. He said the only thing that would keep you from leaving again is if you were going to get married. So I wrote him a letter and told him I was getting married, and he got me out of that cruise. But it was only a month or two later I was put on a Carib cruise.
What is that?
Well, it's a float down in the Caribbean where they
Okay.
keep units ready.
Okay.
So I think that wound up being a 5-month cruise instead of a 3-month cruise. Came back to 2nd Medical Battalion after the cruise and got an out. I think my out was in January of '69.
Okay. And then where did you go once you were discharged?
I went back to Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is where my parents lived.
Okay.
And I worked with my dad for a while, and then was hired by the company that I'd worked for previous to the Marine Corps, and wound up in Cincinnati, Ohio, in training with them, and then just all over from then.
Okay. How long have you lived here in Blount County?
I've been here 20 years.
20 years. Well, we're glad to have you. How does it feel today if you wear your Marine Corps shirt or a hat or anything? Do people thank you? I mean, how does it feel to be a Vietnam veteran?
It's interesting to me. I'm proud of my service. It's interesting to me that when we came home, we were baby killers and unacceptable. To hear the thanks today is bittersweet. I appreciate it. We just had dinner in the restaurant night before last, and I had a Marine cap on. And as we were walking out, a fellow was holding the door for us to walk out, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you a veteran?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he shook my hand and thanked me for my service. I think we all have to appreciate that. And I'm certainly thankful for the people that are serving today. We're not having a Second World War or anything like that, but the defense of our beliefs and freedom in the world is extremely important. So I appreciate everything the young guys are doing today. Semper Fi, guys.
Yep. Well, Max, you know, we're really proud of you and thankful for your service in Vietnam, and grateful that you made it home, and especially serving in the Marine Corps. And I just want to thank you for doing this interview today.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Appreciate what you do for the veterans.
Well, thank you.